Good morning and welcome to Sports Desk. I'm Ed Nunez, your host, along with Alden Iwani, our producer. Our special guest today is former co-host Scott Galetti, host of the Team Talk Show on ESPN Radio 101.7. Also, my very good friend Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ed. I really appreciate it. Glad to be back here on ProView Networks.
You know, Scott, we're going to first start the show. This is a show dedicated to Austin Denton, who passed away December 17th last year. And it's hard to believe that it's been 1 year. We've got some great pictures that our producer, Alden Iwani, will be putting up on screen here in a few minutes. But we did also want to mention Dennis D.C. Chavez, the ring announcer, worked for Pettis Boxing, Legacy Boxing. He was the first host of Legacy Boxing, a showcase, the show. Dennis Chavez passing away last Wednesday from COVID, complications of COVID at age 66. And I'll tell you, DC had his own unique style. DC was an entertainer. DC was one heck of a ring announcer. May he rest in peace.
You know what? DC was fun to talk to also. When I was doing work at Route 66, I would see him on occasion, both when he was just there and when he was doing the boxing events that were held there. And just what a class guy. He was a character. He was fun to talk to. And like you said, he had his own style. It was very electric, and he is going to be sorely missed. It caught me off guard. I think you knew a little bit more about what was going on with him than I did. But when I saw the news, I was devastated.
Yeah, so again, rest in peace to Dennis D.C. Chavez. Again, some of the things he would say, and I'd say to myself, I know I can't say that, but D.C. can. Right. What an entertainer he was, so rest in peace. Right. But, Scott, we wanted to dedicate this show to the late Austin Denton. I think out of all the broadcasters in town, he worked more closely with you than he did with any of us. And, you and I talked about this when it happened. I remember you saying you were doing a report last year on ESPN Radio, and you broke down. You lost it when you heard the news, and I think it hit us all like a ton of bricks. And I think one of the things that I remember so well of him working with you is he was the halftime guy, he's the post-game guy, and one of the things that you mentioned is the homework that he did. And his interviews after the game were just unbelievably great, prepared, professional. Talk a little bit about that. And you mentored him quite a bit. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, Ed, I'm going to mention the day that he passed away. The day before, a lot of people got to go visit him at the hospital, and it was kind of a farewell to him. I did not realize how bad he was. I knew he was in the hospital. I knew he was sick, but I expected him to come out. Thankfully, Joe O'Neill, team president, happened to go to that event the day before, and to this day, I feel guilty that I didn't go. But that morning, the next day, Joe O'Neill calls me up around 20 minutes, 15 minutes before my morning sports update, my first one, because I do 3 a morning. And I just lost it. I'm talking to him over the phone. I'm crying over the phone. He says, well, if you can't do it until the next report, go ahead and hold off. And I said, no, I got to do it. And I actually was crying on the air as I was giving the report about his passing away. And to this day, it makes me tear up. And yeah, you're right, Ed. I mentored him. He became almost like a second child to me, a second son. Just the way I knew him from my first year at UNM in 2008. His dad, his mom, Brian and Tracy, I got to meet them. I got to hang around with them a lot because they were part of the cheerleading squad. Got to see a lot of cheerleading practice. Brought my daughters to cheerleading practice a lot. So everyone got to know each other. And then 1 year, speaking of mentoring, the Lobos were in Portland, and it was the year that they ended up playing Louisville. Well, I used to do the Paul Krebs show every Wednesday for Learfield Sports and 770 KKOB. And I did it remotely from a ballroom at the hotel that we were all staying. And Austin comes in. Brian, his dad, and I had set this up, and Austin had no idea what was coming. Brian had videotaped Austin doing a game. It was a basketball game, and he was doing play-by-play. And Austin had no idea that his dad was rolling tape behind him. He was just rolling along. So Brian asked me, would you be kind enough to critique this in front of Austin and I? So, Austin will get a kick out of this. So I was able to actually critique Austin. I believe he was about 9 or 10 at the time. He was young because this was 2011, I want to say. And it was just unbelievable because the look on his face while we're watching this thing, he was afraid I was going to beat him up. And I couldn't believe how good he was. And he reminded me of myself when I was younger, because we didn't have videotapes, Ed. You know that. We didn't have video games that you could do live. We had board games, in like hockey games with slots and basketball games with slots that I used to, or just go out in out to the park and watch people play. And I used to do play-by-play like that. And we both, it turns out, wanted to be play-by-play announcers and had a love for it when we were about 3-4 years old. So I really took a liking to Austin, obviously just him as a kid. But once I realized what he wanted to do, you're right, I mentored him, and I really gave him my best because I wanted him to succeed. And it came full circle a couple of years ago in 2018 in January when I lost my voice during the Metro Championship, and Austin's sitting there with Brian O'Neill, and I made it through the pregame show. I started the broadcast, and then I pointed to Austin. And Austin was ready, and I knew he would be, and I kind of gave him the hint, and they knew that I was struggling with my voice. But I knew if anyone was going to be prepared, it was Austin. And it caught everyone off guard, including Joe O'Neill, because I thought I was going to be able to make it through the game. But Austin did such a great job. He got better and better and better. You worked with him. I worked with him. I mean, just what he did in his preparation. And I don't even know if his play-by-play is the most striking thing to me, because I got to do, and it really teared me up the other day when I reposted a Facebook post of a picture that I took on his senior day, and it had a picture of Austin the Voice Denton. And it was that same day that I surprised him by miking him up and doing the pregame. He did the introductions for the pregame of the broadcast that we did. He had no idea that we were recording it. I recorded it. We sent it to him and his dad so they would have it as a memory for his senior day.
Well, I remember listening on ESPN radio. We were doing some of the games at El Dorado as well, ProView Networks. Mm-hmm. And I was in the car, and I know how bad your voice was because you and I were co-hosting these sports desks.
Right.
And I remember at that time, if you even said 2 words, you would, hack. You had it bad. And thank God you got better. But I remember listening to my car, and I thought, gosh, I've never heard anyone so natural. And he was natural with the flow, the transition from play to play, the way he described plays. And look, I'll tell you one thing. You and I talk about play-by-play a lot. I've learned quite a bit from you, from Henry T., from Robert Portnoy. Everyone is different, from Adam Deal, Sebastian Noel, Richard Tripp. We've got some great announcers at ProView Networks, Tyler Ortega, Leroy Lucero. There's some great play-by-play guys. But one of the things that, you'd see Austin's getting a steady helping right from you right there. And one of you made me realize, one thing you made me realize was about my voice, about controlling my voice. And I really, really worked hard on that. And there's other things I'm still working on, because it's still, it's a work in progress. But for someone so young to be so good that early was amazing to me. And I'll tell you, he blew me away. I think he blew everybody away with his description of that game. That was it a championship game, Scott, wasn't it? I think
it was the semifinals and the finals. He did both days, and he also worked with Yvonne Sanchez on the girls' game. So he got to do a couple of games, and he got to do both championship games. But it started in the semis, so it was kind of funny. And one thing that he didn't know that I was going to do for him, that I started immediately, because I've been a producer. I started producing for him, getting him information. I did all of his runs. I wrote him notes. I was making sure that I gave him and Brian a lot of information throughout the game, so I wasn't just sitting there. So it really helped him a lot. He was wide-eyed. He was so happy just to be in that position. He didn't like the fact that I was in the position that I was, but you could tell that with me sitting there helping him, it was kind of cool, because just the look on his face, it's like this young man is doing his dream on the air live, and he didn't even know he was doing it that day, because he had done Yaffle games on ProView already, and he had already done ProView games. But let's face it, radio is a lot different. You got to talk a lot more than you do on TV, and he was prepared to the nines, and to this day, I love it.
Yeah, you got to paint that picture on the radio. You're right. We also need to mention, Scott, he was the PA voice of La Cueva Athletics.
Yeah, and
I
that's
remember
what I
yeah,
taped
yeah.
his senior day. That's what I taped him doing the PA because he had never had a tape of that before. And he was introducing all the seniors, and he was one of the seniors. So I got to give him the tape and his dad the tape, and he was very appreciative of that because I'm sitting there like a proud dad listening to him over the air because we had the PA pumped in to our broadcast so he could do that.
I was there last year at La Cueva when I did a basketball game there, and the PA guy. No, don't get me wrong. He did a good job, but I just kept thinking. I heard Austin's voice in my mind because he was he loved La Cueva. He did. He was a big bear guy. He's all about La Cueva athletics.
Right.
And when I just hearing that voice, and so you associate a voice with the school, and his voice was definitely associated with La Cueva High School. We're gonna go to some pictures now. Producer Alden Iwani, you were kind enough to send some pictures. Brian Denton sent us some pictures. Alden Iwani is going to get us some pictures up on the screen. That's Coach Williams, I believe. Go ahead, Austin. Or I'm sorry, Alden. Yeah. Oh, for Cleveland, that's right.
Hmm. Amazing. Great job, Alden Iwani. I'm sure we're near a break. Just let us know. But Scott, going back to, I forgot all about the NFL, CBS, the NFL Today, and announcing the draft picks. And again, he put a lot of work into a young life, things that
people would only dream about, right? He got to meet
Yeah.
Peyton Manning. He got to go on the set of the NFL Today to talk to Deion Sanders. And those are just unbelievable thrills. And he handled it like the pro that he was, for sure.
Well, last year, Ed, during the playoffs, they actually did on CBS, they actually did a memorial to him because of him doing that halftime show that Alden was talking about. And then when he did the announcement for the draft pick, my wife and I, our family, were all watching this. I was in tears while he was doing it because he killed it. He absolutely aced it. You know, on the national stage, he's there in his wheelchair. He's decked to the nines. He looks so good, and you know, he just surprised everyone because he just did it like a natural.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned that, and I remember watching too. And I think when you see someone you know succeed, you're thrilled. And again, you had a big hand in it. And I remember you telling me about the critique that you gave him. I don't know anybody that tries at 7 years old. I always wanted to try play-by-play, but I remember when Henry T threw me into the water and I wasn't ready for it. I hadn't thought about it until then, right? And I'm still working, still trying to develop, trying to get better. He was good at a young age where it blew you away. You're like, gosh, he's only 17 years old, and look at the way he sounds as opposed to people that have been doing it in the business for 30, 35 years.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Absolutely right about that, Ed.
Yeah, he had a natural
it was
flow.
amazing.
Yeah, no, but I think also too, you know, sometimes it's hard, but he's a ball of clay with you, right? You're telling him, hey, let's listen to this, do this. He listened, he learned, and he was getting better and better. And just like I said, when I heard him do those games, you know, in substitution with you, I couldn't believe how good. Again, Brian O'Neill's a pro. It's been on with you for years. Brian O'Neill is one of the best color guys in the game, no question. But it just sounded so good.
No, and the other thing, Ed, is when I actually got to do, he was a color guy on ProView, and I was a play-by-play guy on a couple of Yaffle games out at Community Stadium. And I'll never forget that because he was watching me, and I was giving him tips on, here's how you do this, here's how you do this, kind of preparing him, even though he wasn't doing play-by-play, like, these are the kind of things that you look for, these are the kind of things that you mention. And he just absorbed everything. It was amazing because he wanted to learn so badly that even games that he did on ProView of Yaffle games and different games, I would give him critiques. And, you know, for the most part, it was just more what he can improve on because there was never really anything that he did wrong.
Right.
That's the amazing thing about it.
You mentioned
it was more like, okay, we're going to make you better than you already are, which is saying something.
At that age, for sure. Let's take a break. We'll be back to the sports desk with our special guest, Scott Galetti, after these messages.
Well, I'm going to the frontier, walking to the cashier, order up a root beer and a number one. Cover it with green stuff, one scoop is not enough. Find a booth is real tough, back by the Duke. Meet my family, meet my friends in the quirkiest restaurant I have ever been. All of Albuquerque's favorite spot, it's the Frontier Restaurant.
The Frontier Restaurant is a proud supporter of ProView Sports Network.
Welcome back to the Sports Desk, live on Facebook, also streamed live on Facebook. I'm your host, Ed Nunez, along with producer Alden Iowani, our special guest today, former co-host of the Sports Desk, Scott Galetti. Scott, again, thanks so much for joining us. This is a memorial show to Austin Denton, who passed away December 17th, 2020. And you've brought up some great memories of Austin. And I remember, you know, hearing him, and you know, his dad is, you mentioned Brian and Tracy and his daughter, his sister Sky. Brian, so dedicated in bringing, you know, Austin to the stadium. And I remember that, you know, and I remember Brian at Community Stadium, at, you know, Wilson Stadium, at the Pit, so many places seeing Brian Denton and Tracy and his sister Sky, dedicated family to
Right.
Austin Denton for sure.
No, they were great parents. They are great parents, and you know, just seeing the joy in Brian's face, and the few times that Tracy would make an appearance, seeing the joy in her face, because sometimes she would poke into the press box at Wilson Stadium in different places, but usually she was out with her daughter while Austin and Brian were out at the game or at the stadium or at a gym where we were doing a game. So you know, just the dedication is unreal. And the minute they showed up, it didn't matter if it was Coach David Williams or if it was Brian Denton or whoever was there, you know, even, you know, the guys from ProView. When he would show up, everyone had a huge smile on their face because Austin was there. And you knew he was going to do a bang-up job no matter what he was doing. And it was just, you know, it just felt like, you know, a happening. It's like, oh, Austin's here, so this is going to be cool, because he would ask for, you know, occasional help for like, oh, do you have any information on this for like his halftime show? But for the most part, he did everything himself. So it was really, really cool.
But I think, you know, the other thing, Scott, I wanted to mention for our seating and selection show at ProView, he's the information guy. He's got his tablet. He's given us shout outs from Clayton, shout outs from Mora, wherever else they're coming from.
Right.
He's doing all the shout outs from around the state. So the guy, one thing you're about, Scott, and, you know, I learned that from you a lot, was homework. You know, you're doing your homework, right? If you're going to do a game, find out about who's in the lineup. You better pronounce those names right, the whole thing. So one thing about him that he definitely learned from you was doing that homework, because I remember being on the set of the seating selection show, and gosh, he had his tablet out, and it was beautiful. Hey, shout out from whoever, Coach, you know, from Mora, from around the state. You know, that's Richard Tripp does that a lot, you know, when we're on the show. But when he did that, he was such a big part of what we did, seating and selection wise, and he brought such a different element, and he always had he was always prepared, always ready to roll with whatever information was needed for whatever broadcast it was.
Right. And shout out to Steve Davis, you know, number one, for doing a great job at ProView, but number two, I think it was the last seating and selection show that he did, we're all there, and Austin has his own table. Remember that? When
that's right. He was off to the side.
He was off to the side, and he had his own table. It's like, let's throw it to Austin. And again, he just killed it because he had all the information. He said everything that he wanted to say. He said it very short and sweet, and it was just a perfect setup. But I'll never forget him sitting there, and then all of us, because I saw a post of the picture on Facebook not too long ago of all of us standing around him at the table after the show.
That was always the highlight, Scott. After we're done, right? The picture, everybody's in the picture,
right?
You know, and you're right. I think that's something, you know. And I've worked at ProView 8 years now. I've been at ProView 8 years, and it's been, you know, in some of the things I've done rugby, I've done boxing, volleyball, so many things. We've had a great time.
You've done rugby. That's right.
Yeah, you know, no, the rugby thing was, we had some real fun with that too. You know, Brian and Tracy. His parents were also in charge of the Lady Lobo cheerleaders for many years over there.
Well, that's when I met him.
Yeah, and that's something that I wanted to make sure. I just got a text from my good friend Roger Holian that wanted me to make sure we mentioned that. So they were very involved with UNM and very involved, as I mentioned, when I think about Brian coming into the stadium and just being there with Austin at every broadcast. And I remember him saying that too. He would say this to me, he'd say, hey, you know, Austin's listening to you. He's trying to pick up from whatever and we all do that.
Yes,
I did that as a referee, right? As a referee, I'd look at other referees and say, hey, you know, that looked good, but I can only be Ed Nunez, but I can incorporate some of that into my game. Same thing as a broadcaster.
Right.
You know, you've been a professional broadcaster for what, 30, 35 years, right? So there's a lot of things people can learn if they listen to Robert Portnoy, Henry Tafoya, Connie Alexander was awesome. Connie Alexander was awesome. So there's so many people that I've listened to, and we, you know, we all try to get better. And I think that's one thing that you absolutely did for Austin Denton was he learned so much, right? And he was so good. Some of the things I'd listened at the halftime, the post-game report, and you and Coach Williams, you guys work together very well. David Williams is, you know, one of the best color analysts in football, no question, right? He's been around a long time. You guys have a great chemistry together. But I thought that he lent a lot to that broadcast, because sometimes bringing in a third person can be hard. But I thought he did a great job in it, in lending what he brought to the broadcast as well.
One of the other things that at first Austin didn't know how to take me, because he used to joke with my daughters, does your dad talk to you that way too? And they said, yeah, because every time he would show up, and I miss those days, I would say, oh, it's that darn kid, he's here again. And he would just kind of chuckle with his, the laugh that only he had. And it was the way we kicked things off, because I would just say, oh, there's that darn kid. And that's how we would start our day of working. So I miss the heck out of him. I mean, just what he went through is sad, but what he did for himself, for others, and everything else, just the messages that he conveyed out there, and just how he conveyed himself on a national stage, let alone here and at La Cueva. Hats off to him, because, told him one time when he was going through some hard times before he was in the hospital, he's a stronger kid than I'll ever be, because I don't know how I could have handled that. And he always had a smile on his face.
No, you know what? I think one of the things that you bring a good point of, how many people's lives did he touch with his work, and how many kids did he inspire? There might have been a young person that wants to get into the business that watched him and said, you know what? They learned from him. Plus, they're thinking, hey, if he did it, he walked that path, how do I get there? Because he's professional. He knows his information. So he was an inspiration to a lot. I mean, I haven't seen a young kid like that broadcast, at that age in a long time. He was 16, 17 years old when he started doing it. So I think he put a lot into small time, to a small window. But the things that he did, the NFL Today, he's on a lot of championship broadcasts. We heard him at the pit for ProView Networks. He did a lot of championship games for us in football, in baseball, basketball. The PA work he did for La Cueva. What he did in a short period of time will never be forgotten. And again, you touched his life for sure, but he certainly touched ours.
No, he touched a lot of lives. I mean, he touched my family's life. He touched my daughter's life. He touched my wife's life. I mean, anyone that we were around, I mean, looked up to him. And he just took things in stride, and he wasn't about himself. He was about other people. And that's what I love about him, because it wasn't about him, but you look at things, it turned out about him, but he never took it about himself. He took it about others, and how he treated others, and how he broadcast and made sure that he got those names right, because it affected other people. And he was very cognizant. I don't want to mess up this broadcast. I don't want to mess up that kid's name. No. That's the way he looked at it.
No. If anybody's taught me that, it's you, man. I'll tell you. We got about 1 minute left. You got that pounded in my head. You got that pounded in my head. 1 minute left, Scott. Tell us a little bit about Team Talk and what you're doing at 101.7 now. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, Joe O'Neill's been doing Team Talk from 4 to 6, and then I've been doing the 6 o'clock hour with Sam Hauser, and Sam Hauser's been doing the whole show. Although a couple of shows last week, Sam and I went the whole 3 hours together. And, it's back to like when I did the sports desk. When I'm on the show, a lot of homework. You got to make sure that you know what you're talking about, even if you're not going to talk about it. So there's a lot that goes into even 1 hour, but it's a lot of fun.
You know what? You do a great job of listening. You've had some great guests, and as always, you're always prepared. Scott Galetti, thanks so much for being our special guest this week. It was a blast.
Thank you.
Do it again.
Thank you, Ed.
You bet.
It's been fun.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. For producer Alden Iwani, I'm Ed Nunez, wishing you a happy holidays from ProView Networks on the Sports Desk.